Well, this evening, we're absolutely delighted to welcome Zoe Butt to deliver her lecture titled Finding Mentors and Confidants Within the Slippage of What is Visible or Presumed Absent. The talk will be chaired by art historian Chaitanya Sambrani, a dear friend of Tushar's and also all of us at the foundation. To briefly introduce Zoe, Zoe Butt is a curator and writer. Her practice centers on building critically thinking and historically conscious artistic communities, fostering dialogue among cultures of the globalizing South. Zoe was the artistic director of the Factory Contemporary Arts Center, Ho Chi Minh City, till 2021, the executive director and curator of San Art in Ho Chi Minh City from 2009 to 2016, the director of international programs, the Long March Project in Beijing from 2007 to 2009, and assistant curator contemporary Asian art at the Queensland Art Gallery in Brisbane. And this post particularly focused on the development of its Asia Pacific Triennale of Contemporary Art. She has published widely with Routledge, Sternberger Press, J.R.P. Ringier, amongst others. And notable curatorial endeavors include Pollination, 2018 at the Sharjah Biennale 14, Leaving the Echo Chamber, Journey Beyond the Arrow in 2019, Conscious Realities, a 3-year program that ran from 2013 to 2016, Embedded Souths in 2016, and the San Art Laboratory, again for 3 years until 2015. Zoe is the MoMA International Curatorial Fellow, a member of the Asia Society's Asia 21 Initiative, and member of the Asian Art Council at the Guggenheim Museum. She's currently a PhD candidate at CREAM at the University of Westminster in the UK. She's also a visiting curator at the Department of Fine and Applied Arts and is a guest lecturer in the MA in Curatorial Practice program at the Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok. She also lectures at the Alternative Art School in America and is an advisor at the Cadist Art Foundation and an academic advisor at the Times Museum in Guangzhou. She currently lives and works in Chiang Mai and in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. A few technical points before we begin. Zoe will speak for around 45 minutes, following which there will be a discussion chaired by Chaitanya and a question and answer to conclude. We request you to type your questions or comments as you have them in the chat box. You don't have to wait until after the lecture, and Chaitanya will moderate these. We're going to request you to keep your audio and video off, please, through the talk, and would also like to inform you that the session is being recorded. I'm going to now hand over to SSAF's founder and managing trustee, Vivan Sundaram, to speak a few words. So over to you, Vivan.
Thank you, Latika. Apart from being whatever I am for SSAF, this is a very personal, meaningful moment for me because Tushar Joag, I believe, was really at the peak of his extraordinary career. He was bringing together, working with students, which he hadn't done before, and in fact, so wonderfully learning from them. And I think that his collective democratic spirit was astounding. He was really going to be a figure that would have shone on incredibly over these years. So we all felt at SSAF that we should continue his legacy by having these memorial lectures, which we had not done. Normally, memorial lectures are given to people who have worked for 50, 60 years of their lifetime. So I'm really honored to just briefly introduce and say this. Chaitanya Sambrani is again a very old friend. I can say that he's South Asian, he's East Asian, and he's also Australian. So he's truly from the South, a kind of not a nomad, but he really positions himself where he is and engages with both art and discourse. And Zoe, if I can be personal, we met her in Thailand, and she said in a conference of Asian art that she said, if you're here, then you just have to come to my city and to my center. And she was so generous in showing us. She came again for the Asia ensemble. So and Geeta have known her, and we have been following her writing. She's passionate about collectives, and uh, she will enumerate this for this afternoon. I thank you, Zoe, for agreeing to speak. Namaste.
Sawadika. Thank you, Vivan, and thank you to the Sher-Gil Sundaram Foundation for the opportunity and honor to speak at the second memorial lecture for Tushar Joag, and to be reconnected with a dear old friend, Chaitanya Sambrani, someone who has been in my world since I first started as a curator, actually. So the title of my little sharing today is Finding Mentors and Confidantes within the slippage of what is visible or presumed absent. I love encountering inspirational artworks, especially ones that offer a dialogical window onto a historical consciousness, embodying particular community, an encounter that shines with brilliance in its prompting of multiple questions, perspectives, potentials. And such encounter often begins before the final work is done, before it is considered final, before it is considered ready for making visible. I recall Kadim Ali explaining that he had just returned from Kabul, Afghanistan, where he had had to arrange a meeting with the husbands of the wives he had employed to complete his embroideries, for they had initially forbidden the work, believing the figurative images contravened Islamic law. I recall asking Boykom Khan when he envisaged being able to complete his desired wooden sculpture. He shared that it was dependent on him finding a jackfruit tree in Hoi An, Vietnam, that had already died, and that it was a tree whose spirit granted him the right to use its wood. I recall entering Kidlat Tahimik's Balanghai Ni Ikang cinema in Baguio, in the Philippines, in awe of his film props that literally provided the foundations for its physical structure. Kidlat introducing these characters as part of his family, for indeed, his props, what I like to refer as his sculptures, do populate not only his film screens, but also indeed his home. Such artists, or I would like to say my mentors, my confidants, prompt recall that ideas and materials are connected to stories and purpose, and that such matter is highly contextual. What sits around these ideas and materials, its stories and purpose, are other ideas and materials, stories and purpose. As Donna Haraway famously quips, it matters what worlds. Lately, I find myself in regular recall of Swedish author Sven Lindqvist and his unique travel diary, Exterminate All the Brutes, an inspirational marvel in his relaying of history in its simultaneous multitude, as imaginations of the Congo in its past and present echo across his pages, as he makes clear of the need to situate our knowledge and how it is formed. For our habits of privileging the text as primary evidence, our conceiving of it as stand-alone study, as object or sign, often fails to register the full force of the subjectivities of its author and their embodiment of particular time and space. In this book, Lindqvist weaves his own personal journey through the sands of the Sahara as he retraces the infamous steps of Joseph Conrad, recalling Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Lindqvist deftly articulates the other texts and opinions of Conrad's time that informed and made urgent the birthing of his Heart of Darkness. Lindqvist gives map to the texts that would have populated Conrad's world. He makes clear that the publication release of Heart of Darkness in 1899 was heavily influenced by the scientific debates of the era concerning social evolution, the birthing of racism and its politicization, think Charles Darwin, and the question of extinction and genocide. The power of Lindqvist's Exterminate All the Brutes is not only his literary method of dividing prose and historical fact between the situatedness of his own body, Conrad's body, the political landscape of Conrad, and the historical ramifications of Heart of Darkness, but it is also a tome that gives testament to how the creative examinations of an author or an artist can rewrite, repopulate histories, disciplines in both perspective and form. And I can't escape recall of this horrendous Heart of Darkness in another fictional filmic epic that Conrad's text inspired, namely Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now, a film that came to determine for so many across the globe the horror of the Vietnam War. And so the Congo starts to feel like a place and space of similarity to my adopted home. Distance and geography collapse. Intertextuality gives wonder to the calamity of humanity. Such worlding is community for me. This is about the dialogical connect between differing dimensions of time and space across what is tangible and intangible, between what is dead or alive, what is written or spoken, between what is in process and what is conceived as final, between the visible and invisible, audible or silent. It is about collectively deprivileging the primacy of sight. It is about delving deep into authorship and intention, which is inextricably connected to sight and time. It is about building collective historical consciousness that disavows the disciplinary border, the political border, the racial border, the gender border. It is about building trust with our knowledge beyond competition, beyond commodification, beyond assumption. For me, it has been about success and failure, love and loss, self-censorship and apathy, searching for collective agency that is responsible, with leadership, that is open-minded in its desire to collapse, reform, transmit. I wish I had met Tushar. From what Chaitanya writes and recalls of him, he sounds like a kindred spirit, someone who also fought with his conscience in this world of art, a world that needs worlding on an exponential level. He shares art cannot on its own bring about societal changes, not without a political revolution. But an atmosphere conducive to such a political revolution can only be created by the questions that are raised in the ideological cultural sphere. Art is responsible for maintaining cultural continuity as well as providing ruptures that bring a fresh outlook through its questioning of the present. But such rupture struggles in an art discipline and industry with aesthetic and conceptual brilliance, for it is laced with an unregulated blindfold that shimmers too much with nepotism and elitism and all things called spectacle, soft power, and tourism. At least in the globalizing circles that financially determine how art is popularly imagined and valued, its white cube museums, its art fairs, its NFT meta worlds, its corporate celebrity collector groups. This image-oriented world has the mode of the exhibition in bed with the market. Collectors and curators and commercial galleries in dalliance with a strategic placement of museum shows to leverage the market value of an artistic practice. And these jaw-dropping spectacles dripping in staggering budgets can, and don't get me wrong, be incredibly moving aesthetic and immersive experiences. I just wish that the sight of some of this spectacle could be made more accessible to the communities whose historical narratives are artistically conveyed. And I know I've been complicit in this. In my past, I have commissioned artistic projects as a museum employee and appointed curator, whose stories are politically sensitive, where the artist lives and works. whose production involved great detective work in the collation of precious, near-forgotten memories, whose showcase occurred far, far away from the context that made such projects possible, whose context suffers from systemic political poverty and cultural prejudice, and thus does not possess the financial capacity and according cultural infrastructure to make such projects accessible and visible. And it is this question of visibility that I continue to wrestle with as a curator, to balance the tangible with the intangible. When it comes to assessing what exactly an artistic practice can constitute today. And that's where my love of artistic production with community sits centerfold in my daily questioning of purpose with my curatorial work. For in Vietnam, my chosen home of the last 15 years, any form of public gathering of more than 5 people requires government approval, which means the submission of content for all exhibitions and public programs, be it film, music, performance, literature, seminars, workshops, and this list is endless. To be visible is to be officially scrutinized. To be collectively visible is to represent in solidarity. And in the contexts I have lived and worked, such representation can incur arrest, imprisonment, disappearances, social alienation, surveillance of family members, and ultimately, most spectacularly, fear and its bedfellow, self-censorship. And we all must acknowledge that such consequences are the hideous syndrome of many historically just revolutionary moments retaliating against hegemony. But alas, many such social movements do not eventuate in capable leadership, proactive foresight, and co-articulation of long-term dreams. So on a near daily basis, I have been asking myself, as a guest in this Vietnamese community, to whom am I speaking? As a curator and writer, do I care equally for the event, the subject, the production, the meaning of an artwork? How important is it to contextualize artistic motivation? In a neoliberal world which righteously assumes freedom as a democratic right in universal form, globally chained to the glee of a free market, whose trade of relations is marked by irrevocable neglect and destruction, not only of humanity, but its natural environment. How can the world of culture, its art, offer space with which we can reimagine our social bonds of care? In my attempt to answer such questions, I quite deliberately left museum employ in order to better understand the context of artistic production, determined to explore how artists are perceived in their navigation of local and international visibility. I thus decided to commit to Saigon, to affirm for myself, I am calling this home, not a base. For there is a common quip in my industry who all too casually ask, where are you based? No, I was going to call Saigon home. And it has been a critical commitment and anchoring of time that has taught me much. Many colleagues, friends, and family thought my commitment curatorial suicide, however, for yes, Vietnam is a country that continues to be very suspicious of independent thinking, where art and culture is historically, ideologically considered a propagandist arm of the state. But my desire to learn with my community by searching for access and opportunity to ideas and resource of critical cultural value to my local, has honed my sensitivity to the power play of language and perception in my speech and writing, to the differentiation of living as host and guest, to the impossibility, yet necessity, of constant translation, to understanding my own agency in critically urging reassessments of reality as a curator, to the necessity in giving time to sensorial experiences of art towards an expansion of how we understand, interpret, value, and historicize what art can be. Such perspective was particularly honed by my struggles to financially and intellectually sustain my leadership of artist-initiated organizations in Saigon, initially San Art, co-founded by Jin Kulei, Tuan Andrew Wen, Funan Tuk Han, and Tiffany Chung. An organization committed to building artistic connect between Viet Kieu and local artists, particularly in South Vietnam, that traitorous South. Viet Kieu, a term referring to Vietnamese who live abroad, but is historically a derogatory word referring to the boat people who fled a communist Vietnam. Saigon is that once pearl of the Orient. Just sharing a few snippets of my San Art period and the censorship that we endured, which I'll share a little bit more about in a minute. So Saigon is that once pearl of the Orient, but it is also that once territory of charm culture since the 2nd century. But sadly, the National Arts Educational Curricula does little in the unpacking of that memory. Its École des Beaux-Arts having been instituted by the French in 1924, with a curricula of plastic arts that has had little innovation since the 1950s. The Vietnamese government openly acknowledging they do not teach contemporary art, their university faculty for the arts licensed to teach technique only, where foreign faculty are still prohibited. So within such a landscape, San Art attempted to expose differing historical narratives and artistic methods, and it taught us much. In 2011, local artist Bang Quang proposed a solo show titled Space Limit. Its focus was a series of 11 large-scale photographs depicting various social behavior, national myths, encaged within a woven bamboo dome structure, identical to the myriad coop we find housing chicken squawking on the streets across much of Asia. Children watching television, school children studying. Such acts all carefully framed beneath such cage. The day of the exhibition opening, the gallery architecture itself, physically surrounded by a bamboo cage, we received official notice from the Vietnamese Ministry of Culture, Sport and Tourism that only one of the 11 artworks were permitted. San Art had already hung the entire show, so we decided to remove all prohibited artworks, replacing each with a small sign indicating artwork not permitted for display, in addition to making public the official license papers that censored the show. The next morning, we were hit with fines from the Cultural Police for having made evident the ministry's censoring of the show, the government threatening to remove our business license. This exhibition remains of particular portent for me still today, for it demonstrates the primacy of the image over experience, for it was prohibited to show any representation of human activity under a cage, but it was allowed to place the physical architecture of the gallery under a cage, to which all guests did indeed actually experience. From this point on, my curatorial attempts to prompt cultural memory with my community took great inspiration from this limit, mining the dialogical realm of making art, moving focus away from presumed display to the dynamism of artistic production, the experience and embodiment of conversation, debate, the performing of our ideas and critique, the role of the question and artistic intent in conducting research, this being the learning space for building conscious community, as opposed to the stereotypical understanding of the curator laboring in the aftermath of an artwork's finalization. Inspiration to explore the space of artistic production as the realm of an art at work was also spurred by a growing awareness that Though the growth and development of the contemporary, i.e. experimental art in Vietnam was made possible with thanks to the funding streams of nationalized agency, think the Goethe Institute, the Alliance Française, the Japan Foundation, and while such entities should be accorded a significance for their contribution to international exchange, they were also contributing to a massive memory gap. For in accepting funds from such NGO, the grantee is often required to dialogue with that funder's national practitioner, thus often further exacerbating colonial ties with little comparative reflection. I thus grew alarmed at the lack of local connect with a historical consciousness of lateral depth in my community. For Vietnam has much more in cultural commons with, say, Cambodia and China than it does with France or Germany. It was thus with the fortune of a Prince Claus grant, one of the most generous and understanding foundations from the Netherlands committed to the Global South, that I was able to initiate the near 4-year program called Conscious Realities with Sound Art, beginning 2013, inviting key thinkers and artists from across Southeast Asia, South Asia, Latin America, and Africa to speak and make and play, engaging 3 themes concerning the role of mythology, the impact of the rise of the social sciences, and the responsibilities within materiality and its use in contemporary artistic practice. Utilizing predominantly the private space of the residency, the seminar, the critique, the workshop, the field trip, the studio, but also negotiating the public exhibition and select public lecture. Conscious Realities enabled multiple encounters for and with my local interdisciplinary community, a rare chance with which to challenge all of our assumptions with knowledge from beyond, together. And again, this project taught us much. I recall the generosity of artist Nalini Malani unpacking her concept of global parasites, sharing her research and methods surrounding her study of systemic corruption through the corporate machinations of Monsanto, alongside her commitment to raising awareness of gender inequality in India. We, Nalini, and the group of committed participants of Conscious Realities, consisting of artists, writers, architects, designers, social workers, and more, going on to spend an afternoon at the Museum of Southern Women, a display of revolutionary zeal, celebrating the command of women during the Vietnam War. I realized how few leading women artists were there in Vietnam, as my young local artist girlfriends stood in awe, not only of their Vietnamese lady heroes, but also Nalini. I recall Cameroonian writer, editor Ntone Ajabe unpacking Martinican philosopher Edouard Glissant and his Poetics of Relation over a very intense 3-day workshop, moving between 3 languages, French, English, and Vietnamese, in a critical interrogation of what Glissant refers as transparency and opacity. Ntone was determined to strike home his point that one can never ever fully understand what must be and can only ever be translated, and that is Glissant's point, that there is power in accepting what we can never know, that the slippage between meaning results from human experience encountering knowledge, and that such depth of opacity should be respected for its difference. And perhaps if Western rationalism of the human race were not so determined by scientific exactitude, we might have more tolerance for the myriad cultural beliefs sustaining our natural world. My local friends had never experienced such theoretical talk before, let alone frank discussions and what it means to have been historically colonized. Their mind-body connect exhausted at the end of each day, which Ntone rescued each evening with his decks of Pan-African beat, vinyl carried all the way from Douala via Cape Town to Saigon, which he spun to packed affair at a local Saigon port dive bar where feet tapped to tunes birthed in places far, far away. Another cultural language entering the soul, beyond words and semantic concepts. I recall filmmaker and sculptor Kidlat Tahimik, whose filmic wonders are endless reels of unfinished narratives, carrying tales of satire and wit in the critique of empire and all things deemed Hollywood, begging his characters and viewers to reclaim their stories, their images, their minds from the insidious blindness that capitalism seeks to seed across the planet. Sanat screened a myriad of his films, indeed even subtitling a few into Vietnamese. And on his final night, with a heady group of local students, after a Q&A session, Kidlat abruptly leaves the mic and exits to use the bathroom. Or so I thought. He returns in full Ifuga regalia, carrying his props and proceeding to perform the remaining threads of thinking in his head, singing, dancing, and prodding his characters for answers. And my, did my audience sit ever so keenly, so in delighted shock that at the end was a heady ripple of applause. Exposure to foreign cultural ideas of contemporary competence is a rare experience in my community, and Kidlat's performing of narrative has been of immense influence on me and my curatorial work. This was an exotifying spectacle, no doubt, but as an artist who assumes the interdependence of all human and non-human beings, whose narrative he believes is in constant reformulation. His family continue to be his actors. Indeed, his films act like moving albums, entwining the personal and the historic, whose projects he conceives can never be ever finished. He offered me and my community useful conceptual space with which to consider our own narratives as allowed to be in process, and that this space of fluidity was also a way of defying, of challenging the fixed hegemonic structures of identity and display so prevalent in the marketing of the art world. The participants of Conscious Realities still to this day make comment on the impact of meeting such brilliant minds and being given the chance to spend intimate time with their expertise. But it was not all rosy. There were hurdles, major ones. I was criticized for having created a platform that was too far ahead for my audience, that the subjects and texts and experiences under discussion were too complicated for my crew, and that I was wasting valuable money. I found myself asking, from where do we begin? Hegel? Heidegger? Oh, you want me to focus on what would be useful for navigating the market? In the myriad critical debates this project triggered in my local, I realized just how few I had in my community who could prod and cajole with the intellectual provocation my local artists were relishing. And don't get me wrong, this few are loved, but this is the south of Vietnam. The brain drain from the war is real. A whole generation had fled, and the majority of those returning were rarely thinking culture. And how could you blame them, considering the weight of red tape surrounding its visibility in Vietnam? What sustained me greatly when such critique hit home was a parallel program called Sanat Laboratory, established in 2012. It was the residency program nicknamed the Mini MA of Vietnam. We had one building for artists to live in, one building for their studios, a small exhibition space, 6-month rotations, all expenses modestly paid, applications open to artists from across Vietnam and Southeast Asia. Running in tandem with Conscious Realities, the program I just previously shared, this lab matched each artist with a mentor of relatable subject interest who took part in private settings with their artists. The research, clarification of intent, the experimentation with materials, the thinking of audiences, of display, but also self-censorship, which always incurred myriad counseling session and emotional confrontations. All such efforts working towards the creation of a body of new work to be exhibited at the close of each residency period. During the 4 years of Conscious Realities and the arrival of various other knowledge, its programming mandatory for those participating in the lab, I witnessed the impact of such mentorship. It gave courage to be honest with artistic ideas, emboldened the power of learning as a life's passion and not just a degree, encouraged critical awareness of the need to know our past and the interdisciplinary impact of such history, and ultimately of the valuable role artists can play as active and participatory members of contemporary life. Through this program, particularly, I became confidant to an artist community who today are now some of Southeast Asia's most endeared practitioners. And we are proud of that, for it was a we effort. It was the team of San Art, and it did become apparent how rare our skills were, for we struggled to be understood to our general public. Catering to their needs had never been our focus. Artists had always been our mission to cultivate. But to financially sustain our work, our funders wanted visibility. But how to do that in a world where being visible incurred so much censorship? And this brings me to that other worlding that is sadly so still misconstrued across much of Asia. In its ever booming landscape of museum building for assumed publics, structures too often doomed as white elephants, empty and amorphous, with little investment in its human intelligence. Do museums need artists? Do artists need curators? What are the historical consequences of spaces for exhibitions operating on a for-hire basis, as the norm is in Vietnam? Do audiences matter? Sadly, it is common to find the ground floor of the Fine Arts Museum in Saigon for hire, with only the price list available for the general public when they ask for more information on the art on view. In a country where message making is highly surveilled, it is not surprising that arguments of profit dictate the landscape of beauty. I recall my early years in Saigon and being approached by a journalist who inquired as to what I do. I'm a curator. Her eyes furrowed with incomprehension, and then oh, you are a stylist. I laughed at the quip, for I could not fault such a perception. Yes, we organized events. That was the norm. To think of being responsible for caring about artists and how they work, where they work, and what role the memory of such human production gives legacy to was a conversation just not had in this local. Art history? What for? In Vietnam, there is next to no exposure to foreign art that could help answer such questions, though the majority of Vietnamese artists experimenting with their ideas do travel beyond Vietnam in order to engage such stimulating conversation. Displaying foreign art in Vietnam means shipping, which is an incredibly arduous and expensive affair, with customs officials and shipping agents demanding exorbitant tax and ministerial paperwork, processes all too often incurring artwork damage or censorship. It seemed to me the only way to begin cultivating public respect in Vietnam for how art can contribute to the rewriting of our past was to publicly demonstrate the role artists played as its key authors and provocateurs, and that this material must try to focus on Vietnam. Though I was tremendously skeptical, in 2017, I was given an opportunity to try to do just this, as I was approached by Tia Vivan, an artist and one of Vietnam's leading fashion designers, to direct her Factory Contemporary Art Center in Saigon. It was the country's first purpose-built space for contemporary art, and it was an enthralling space. And most crucially, she was willing to pay for the employ of local curators to realize a program responding to local needs, desiring interdisciplinary ideas and multiple formats of audience engagement. Tia Vivan was a local Vietnamese. Her connections were, I hoped, productive. And I was aware that I had yet been given the opportunity of significant space in Vietnam with which to demonstrate the visual ambition of Vietnamese artistic and curatorial practice. Was it possible? Though I had reveled in the dialogical, pedagogical space with artists for 8 years with SanArt, I still believed in the need for visual public presence of artistic ideas and considered it crucial such presence was exposed if the cultural ecology of Vietnam was ever to diversify and improve. So I said yes, I have to try. I felt I owed it to emerging artists and curators in my community at the very least. My team and I were deeply aware of our public's ignorance of the history of contemporary art in Vietnam, considering ourselves students of senior artists in our community whose collective agency and action had pushed the development of experimental languages of contemporary art in Vietnam. So in 2017, after 12 months of interviews with over 25 artist groups across the country, active and inactive today, we organized the educational display titled Spirit of Friendship, bringing together archival material and testimony, artwork, film, and project documentation of various critical activities that we considered historically crucial to the diversifying ecology of independent artistic practice in Vietnam since 1975, of artists learning from artists, of artists experimenting with artists, of artists supporting other artists. Particular strategies were utilized to be able to convey sensitive historical information. The chronology of the establishment of artist collective given socio-political context by very small cards hung near the floor, which you had to bend down to unfold to read. This being a tactic to deter cultural officials from reading. We had also submitted the license papers for only the artwork on display, calling the overall project an educational display, for we knew that scrutiny and thus censorship we would face were we to call it outright an exhibition. The opening night was a particularly memorable affair, for the country's artistic community made great effort to gather together across generations and genres for the first time. This project continues to be a curatorial platform of research and documentation, which can be viewed at the website at the bottom of this image. Such reward for our efforts to make visible artistic talent was also particularly felt in the monumental sculptural works of Li Hung Ly, one of the first female performance artists in Vietnam, whose project Boat Home Boat attempted to carefully address the presence and impact of Vietnamese boat refugees. Equally adored was the tantalizing immersive pictorial installations of lacquer artist Wan Phi, whose explorations of this national craft as a skin, as a living surface, shifted perspective on the meaning of the multiple layering of song mai, the sap of the caisson tree, challenging lacquer to be much more than just a painting, but a surface with which light can travel. It was also heartening to see the students of the social sciences and humanities return to see Hung No's focus on the life of revolutionary hero Nguyen Thi Minh Khai, who struggled to be heard as female member of the newly formed Vietnamese Communist Party in the 1920s, revealed a particular feminist activist. Evident in the myriad letters, sculptures, and videos Hung No had carefully, conceptually composed. I say carefully, conceptually composed, for Nguyen Thi Minh Khai's letters were printed in invisible ink, deliberately, for Hung No knew that she had to give evidence to Nguyen Thi Minh Khai's voice in code across myriad artworks to deftly navigate the license restrictions she knew were so pervasive in Vietnam. The license of this particular project is a craftsmanship of deceit in itself. Of recent immense inspiration and continuing tinkering is the Pollination initiative, building a network of curatorial and artistic relations between private institutions across Southeast Asia, a pollinating of relationships, supporting the growth of curatorial and artistic knowledge between institutional capacities of display across a region which shares multiple historical and cultural synergy. It is a platform seeking to bolster differing, localized, and responsive curatorial and artistic knowledge, supported by institutions and individuals whose arts infrastructure is incredibly crucial to encouraging the growth of artistic production, display, meaning, and historicization of what contemporary art embraces today. Though I will say that a few of these regional institutions have committed curators, not enough, under full-time employ. The Hunters and Gatherers project, realized under the COVID mayhem of the last 2 years, was the most recent edition, a collaboration between my Museum of Contemporary Art in Chiang Mai and the Sam Fund for Art and Ecology from Jakarta. Curators Leah from Jakarta, Yogyakarta, and Kitima Chariprasit from Chiang Mai were invited to conceive a research project, each working respectively with Marianto from Jogja and Rungsak Anuwatwimon from Bangkok, exploring the role of particular local myth in its portent of human ecological neglect, collaboratively working beneath Mount Merapi, erupting during this time in Yogyakarta, and along the lower Mekong's dwindling, overdammed shores. Mentored by senior curatorial expertise from the region, a format for all edition of this program, many a Zoom conversation was had in the decision to carry on with the research as best we could, despite COVID and ecological limits. Indeed, this project, I must say, sustained me during the many months of lockdown I endured in Saigon. The resulting symposia, beamed live from Salar Sosolario Art Space in Bandung, with 12 thinkers and artists. It was followed by a touring exhibition, firstly at my Museum of Contemporary Art in Chiang Mai, followed by my Ili in rural Highlands Isan region of Konkan. This project, Pollination, has taught me the power of what I am still learning from Leah and Kitima as a local embodied knowledge. I have witnessed that curators working with artists in their commitment to particular place and people creates projects where the ethical duty of the project to contextualize process, form, and meaning is paramount, and that such duty largely comes down to the curator and the organizing body to insist that such artistic context is given visible weight. For it comes down to the hosts and facilitators of culture, those who give space and provide interpretation of artists, authors, and their work, who are responsible for the languages and subjects and memories they promote, circulate, and thus historicize. I believe in the power of art to prompt social change, but it must possess its own intertextuality, its own network. Such prompt can spur interdisciplinary collaboration, political lobbying, social advocacy of human rights, nurture potentials in cultural diversity, and so much more. Such awareness of social change began for me in my first job in the arts as a security guard, where I witnessed so many families visiting my local regional gallery, where parents attempted to answer their children's questions about the painted stories lining the walls. Sadly for me, these walls were full of white people telling a white version of Australian history. But it has propelled me to acknowledge my own curatorial agency in challenging what is now placed on that wall. Participating communities surrounding our cultural institutions are paramount to the legacy of the stories told within. These communities are ancestral. Perhaps they are indeed ghosts and spirits. These communities are diasporic and all too often enforced in their migration. These communities are sometimes censored in their knowledge, their actions surveilled, and this list is endless in its forms and conditions. As a curator, I continue to fight for such inclusivity, plurality, sensorial recall, intergenerational memory, and the need for respect of artistic context and its pedagogy in our ever-globalizing systematization of art and its cogwheels of event management and its consumption as entertainment, calling for the hierarchies of the art world to better network their social capacities so as to build critical publics who respect the power of their society's artistic imaginations. I could not do this without the artists, curators, and critical thinkers who surround me, who loom wondrously before me as my mentors and confidants. We must search for such relationships in life for they provoke and nurture reassessment of purpose with our work, encouraging us to question why our work matters and for whom.
Thank you very much, Zoe. That was such a great pleasure to listen to you speak poetically, politically, passionately. It's indeed a great thrill, great privilege, and such a wonderful way to think about the shared projects that extend across your work, and indeed the linkages that these make with the passions that our friend Tushar held so close to his heart. I want to thank you for the richness of the material that you presented to us, especially given the relative lack of knowledge in India around the histories of contemporary art in Southeast Asia, and the major kind of blind spot that continues to haunt the Indian imagination of the contemporary. So I especially thank you for that. I want to pick up on a few questions that you have posed, and to draw you into further conversation. But while I do that, I also want to invite our friends in the audience, and I know, having scanned the audience, that we are indeed graced with the company of many of our friends. There are so many of our friends in the room, metaphorically, virtually, that it's really quite thrilling. I would really love to invite people to type questions or comments for Zoe into the chat, and I will do my best to relay them across, and to group them together as the case may be. So while we make space for that, I'd love to tease out a few things from your presentation, Zoe, and one of them is around the notion of history writing and the relationships between historicization, community building, and language. And there's this fantastic example, these two examples that you spoke about, one with Ntone Jabe, Cameroon, South Africa, Vietnam. The other with the Filipino artist Kidlat Tahimik, and there is a sense in which the construction of community in some cases seems to surpass language. There seems to be the possibility, at least, that artists can dream of, where communities may be constructed across languages, beyond languages, and sometimes in spite of languages, as in fact was so beautifully demonstrated with the marathon seminar sessions that you represented with Antone's work, and which culminated in the rave. So there is a sense in which the community exists outside of language. And I'd love to hear you speak, especially as in terms of your own subject position as an Australian woman of Asian ancestry who has kind of made a conscious decision to go and live in Asia, and this sense of producing communities that transcend the strictures, if you like, of official languaging. This is because history is written in prose, history is written in language, and so the very act of writing history is connected to a statist model of producing a narrative discourse of power. And so in that sense, I'm very, very interested to hear you speak about the idea of languages or communities that are beyond language.
Yeah, the experiences of working with Ntone and Kidlat remain incredibly central to me, because I didn't share that with Ntone. he was so adamant in getting across that silence is permitted. There was one day where we literally sat in silence for about an hour as people were just struggling to be comfortable with the silence. And that silence was remarkable for me in that I realized we're constantly thinking that knowledge is verbal and that there's a need to passe with that for knowledge to be transmitted. But to sit with an idea and to allow the giving of time to an idea to gestate collectively is what that program, not just Ntone, but the whole series of visitors, it repeated across a myriad. It was this confrontation with otherness for my crew that I realized they just needed that time. And that it wasn't something that they could speak about, but it was only something expressed through an eventual conversation or an eventual dance move or an eventual cup of coffee at the end. It became entangled with all of these other gestures. And I saw it in the resulting artworks as a consequence following that these histories were resonating in different forms and presences following it. But I think understanding histories are oral. We talk about language and we assume it's written form. But I think I also learned through the program, particularly also with Kidlat, is that orality has memory. And it continues in the way we dream. It continues in the way we commune with nature. And that orality is embodied in its memory. We may not recall it in our heads and in our minds. We always seek some tangible recall. If we just merely sit and try to reconjure that moment, it comes back. So memory as history is something I tussle with all the time in terms of human memory is fallible. It falls apart, it fragments. Truth starts to morph into fictions. And I at first would say that this is, we can't allow this. We have to demarcate what's fact and fiction in this recall. Now I am incredibly comfortable. Indeed, I want this fact and fiction melding, because often enough in my world of censorship over the last 20 years, it's in fiction that those histories are recalled. And I think it's really important to recognize this for a great part of the artistic societies, particularly in the global South, that it is in their fictional realities that we must look for histories of accord. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Zoe. I have a question in the chat box from our dear friend Sohania Raphael from the M Plus Museum in Hong Kong. Sohania would love to, Sohania first wants to thank you for a stimulating lecture and expresses admiration for the work that you're doing in building communities with the maker at its heart. Could you share how these communities connect with audiences and what that audience community looks like in terms of your own work?
Sohania is a big mentor for me, so thank you, mentor. In terms of what it looks like, at SANART, it was within very intimate spaces. So the artists would connect with its audience in invited mode. That was due to censorship reasons. But that was also an incredibly valuable moment for us as an organization to realize just how many people in our midst were relevant to the artistic research on the table. And indeed, that little community of invite only became word of mouth spread. And so eventually over, say, for example, the 5 years of realizing SANART Laboratory, our intimate community was a second stage because word of mouth had spread once more. So with SANART, it was very much about word of mouth. It was about our collective networks across the country coming together to invite. And so measuring success, I think it's very important to ask ourselves in our work, how do we measure success? Are we looking for quantity with our audiences, or are we looking for quality? And I think in much of the work I've done in the last 20 years, it is only quality, because of garnering mass has not been permissible. It's been very, very difficult. With the factory, it was a very different experience. The connectivity between artist and audience was through actual targeted public events that ranges from performance, dance, theatre, lectures, workshops. But then because of the censorship, we were doing two-tier programming constantly. So the government was on one level aware of the publicity on one level, but then underneath that, we were still continuing to do the invited only, because inside the invited only spaces were we able to be truly honest with the narratives and intentions under investigation. So by those two-tier strategies, audiences really bloomed. And that was one of the most rewarding things when I was afforded the chance to direct the factory, that it demonstrated that exposure to contemporary art, no matter how censored it may have been, is definitely of interest and is of definite thirst in the local community. That was very rewarding.
Thank you, Zoe. I would like to pick up on another thread that comes out of your lecture, and that is around the narrative of the neoliberal capitalist art world, the narrative that is premised on alluring spectacle. And the expectation almost that, here we are, entertain us. Here we are now, entertain us, we are here, so, produce, you are the curator, right? You need to produce the spectacle. To be visible, to be part of that spectacle, to become an element in that economy of spectacles is also to be trapped within it. Yeah, so visibility is a trap. The famous Foucauldian idea in this panopticon of the global art world. Each to become visible, to become part of the remarkable plethora of phenomena, whether they're coming from Vietnam or from Senegal or from wherever else. To become visible is also to court a certain kind of peril. To allow yourself to become a target, and at the same time there is a commitment to inscribing into being, inscribing into relevance, inscribing into the contemporary of different kinds of visibility. And so I'd love to hear you speak about the kinds of material practices that artists are producing. You haven't really, in your presentation, we could see the use of different material kind of strategies and material practices, their histories as well. So I'd love to hear you speak about perhaps one or two specific examples where that sort of really Janus phase of visibility, the inscription into history and becoming trapped in the allure of spectacle starts biting.
So maybe I'll just share my screen once more to share a little bit more on the work of Tuan Andrew Wotton, who realized a very incredible work for the Sharjah Biennial that I co-curated in 2019, called The Spectres of Ancestors Belonging. This particular work taught me, here we go. So it's a 4-channel installation, and it's telling the tale of 4 descendants of 4 families who are French, Senegalese, and Vietnamese. It follows the exodus of French Senegalese soldiers in 1954 who had been posted to Vietnam, who were told to go home, and they had Vietnamese wives, they had Vietnamese families. And this community that exists in Dakar in Senegal is a very small community. It's of minority and suffers recognition. There's a lot of racial prejudice towards this community in Senegal. In Vietnam, this history is largely untold. and is of little knowledge at all in the local fabric. In putting together this particular work, the visibility of the project in Vietnam has still been null, sadly, even though I would love to be able to show it in Vietnam, but the technological requirements for this is beyond the infrastructures that currently exist in Vietnam, sadly. But what really struck me with this particular piece is the artist who realized the archive of material he had in interviewing these families. It was the only archive. And this community had never gathered together as a collective memory before this invitation to participate. And so Tuan was realizing that this work was showing in multiple cities across the world. And yet the communities that really, you know, like I echoed in my talk, displaying it to the communities that matter the most is something that I'm struggling with. And so when Tuan decided to go out of his way and turn his archive and deliver it in singular to all of these different families, independently of the artwork, he has continued this relationship. He is going back to Senegal quite soon to share what he's documented, to create this archive, because he realized that the artwork itself, the spectacle of the artwork itself, was not what mattered most to him. It was that he was able to give back some form of history to these people who have otherwise felt denied. In addition to this, what was quite interesting is when it was screened at Sharjah Biennial, there was a little conference that occurred just after it, days later, at the Africa Center. And it was a conference looking at the African diasporas. And there were some very amazing speakers. And I was wanting, of course, to hear about the prevalence of the African diaspora on the historicization of an African art. But I was stunned that the only intellectuals invited were from America and Europe. And yet this piece stood just in a neighboring little space that articulated a historical memory of a vastly different geography, but it's not present inside this piece of scholarly interrogation. So spectacle for me has value, but what strikes me is where it's not reaching. And it's the spaces of where it doesn't reach that I'm most compelled by and feel ethically responsible for. Don't ask me where I get that ethical responsibility for, but I cannot deny that that's a very strong grounding for the decisions that I've made in my life. I don't know if I've answered your question.
You have, Zoe. Thank you. And in fact, you've made me think even further to kind of, if I may press you around this, the sense of ethics and responsibility, and this is again a question that you know is something that I know that my friend Tushar also carried very dearly to his. In his own pursuits, the question of responsibility, and you know, I'd love to hear you speak as the Australian here, as somebody who comes from, you know, a secular colonial context, as somebody who has sort of made a series of very careful, I think, moves, whether it is from China, Vietnam, Thailand, you know, there is a sense of belonging that you are crafting as you move. You know, so there's a kind of deliberate crafting of belonging that's taking place, and especially for Australians who are of Asian ancestry or in fact are migrants such as myself. You know, this sense of our ethics of belonging within this settler colony, you know, this place that continues to labor under the burden of ongoing colonization, if you like. There is a particular purchase on ethics that I think originates out of this this unsettled sense of belonging that many of us share.
Yes.
And so I'd love to hear you speak about this, about the ethics and responsibility of the curator. Yeah.
Yeah, when I was younger, this sense of not fitting in anywhere was something that used to really bug me. I used to get so angry. I used to feel like I was not getting accessed. I was not fitting the identity bill of I'm not an Australian, I'm not Chinese, I'm not British. I don't quite fit the mark of any particular desired marketable intelligence. And coupled with that was my own family, really, also to a certain extent, sitting largely outside of that memory, also just wanting to be an Australian. But for me, I was so compelled by my cultural histories, and I just really felt I needed to understand where I came from. And it was that made me for my love of history, my love of narrative, because I felt there was so much. I had this sense that there was so much more there. There had to be. And moving away from Australia wasn't an easy choice. I had the luck of working in an incredibly well-endowed institution on an initiative like the Asia Pacific Triennial that gave such incredible research grounding to the planet. And yet I couldn't help but deny I felt like a fraud in that. We were writing the histories of art through a gleaning of an email or a telephone conversation or a snippet of an anecdote from a third-person recall. And the text would go on the wall and I would read it and think, this isn't enough. And for me, I felt dirty. I felt like I was not allowed to say such things, particularly when I had never visited most of these places. I was writing from complete citation, which, though I understand histories are written in such way, but I still felt that I wasn't able to fully convey what I had heard, on the phone, this emotive. It's really the emotive commitments behind what we were thinking that I thought, no, I've got to better understand this. And so when I moved to China, that's when I actually started to revel in being in the in-between. I actually started in these mass monolithic cultures. Like you can't begin to imagine my fear in landing in, well, firstly, I was in Taiwan for a little bit, but then I was in China. But the monolith of a culture coming from what was Australia, which was much more multicultural, it was like a rock hit me. Like, wow. And so this figuring of the in-between became a power. It became something for me that I realized how lucky I am, that I hold multiple identities. Indeed, I think ever since I've hunted for those diasporas in others. I can't even fathom there is any individual of purity. It doesn't exist. And so this governmentality that likes to conceive purity in speech, purity in image, purities in histories, I've fought against that ever since. And it's in this uncovering of intertextuality that I just love. And it's artists that teach me this. They continuously teach me this. And I don't understand how anyone cannot connect to artists as a curator, and this is what I want more out of our institutions of spectacle, because they are so far away from this experience. That's the biggest question mark over the spectacle, is the distance from the context, the distance from the materiality, the smells, the dust, the wetness of thinking that goes into being an artist. And I think my own journey of uncovering my own in-betweenness is mirrored around me. And I think that's where we are heading. The whole decolonizing planet is embracing this. I just wish that our major financial institutions would follow us as fast as we wish them to be.
Thank you, Zoe. I think this provides a really useful segue into a project that you spoke about towards the end of your lecture, and it's the one called Pollination. And I just want to slightly change the spelling of your project, if I may.
Yeah.
And I want to call it POLY hyphen pollination. And I want to invoke the multiplicity of Southeast Asian belongings, and the sense of synergies as well as divergences that can be construed out of this the anti-monolith that is ASEAN, if you like, the anti-monolith that is this idea of Southeast Asia. It's a really powerful project in that sense, to my mind. Something that kind of willingly and potent in a very potent manner asks questions like, the undermining of Merapi that's taking place because of illegal sand mining, for instance. That actually Merapi being the axis mundi, the sort of the great volcano at the center of all things, the great mountain that's being kind of burrowed away by sand miners. There is a sense in which projects such as Pollination actually very productively undermine that jingoistic narrative of monoliths against which you spoke so beautifully. I'd love to hear you speak about what are some of the futures of the Pollination project that you introduced to us briefly, and what's the kind of work that's going to take place.
Well, actually, the next edition of Pollination, which is in research mode in terms of funding, will hopefully engage Malaysia and Myanmar. And this time, looking at the ethnic fear of Islam. Engaging the migration of its memory through the Malay world, but also now that I am living in Thailand, it's also wanting to engage how labor forces of the migratory Rohingya population, how they're being received in Southeast Asia. At the moment, one of those institutions is the Ilham Foundation in Kuala Lumpur, and due to the hideousness of what Myanmar has sunk into, obviously the artistic community has been thrown into fragments. And so we're currently trying to pick up the pieces and try and find ways we can still activate this as an exchange. But one of the other things that Natasha Siddhartha, who is part of the SAM Fund for Art and Ecology, who's still an incredible support, indeed a bit of a co-brainstormer with me. Together, we would like to see all of the editions of Pollination come together in some form, in some site in Southeast Asia. We continue to meet as a group of curators and established curators and advisors as a consequence of the overall scheme of Pollination. And it's interesting to see what kinds of dialogues this is having between curators and artists and what they need for their support, what they want to be able to talk about. What's quite alarming is the lack of space for research. That's one character of Southeast Asia that concerns me, which is largely because of the market-driven understandings of artistic practice that you still must deal with as a graduate. But it's also about a crisis that we're facing politically, where much of Southeast Asia is under an authoritarian tone, where the far right and their determination of culture is in bed with so much profit making, and its educational systems are under incredible disadvantageous campaigning for money making, you know. And in bed with all of this is our desire to find spaces for artists and curators to better understand what they can do together, because again, curators in the region are perceived as people who control artists. And I think it's really important, in an absence of art historians, who is writing art histories? And that's why I say I've enjoyed writing art histories with artists and curators, because indeed, for me, they are the ones doing it. Just got to get academia to accept us. Sometimes they don't like to accept us, but let's see.
Well, some academia may not, but
Yeah.
there's plenty of other kinds of academics out there. Just saying. Another question coming from another of our friends from Australia, Michael Snelling, also currently based in Hong Kong. Michael says, thank you for sharing your insights and experience, Zoe. One of the unique things you bring to contemporary debate and curatorial practice comes from your peripatetic experience working in Australia, China, Vietnam, and now Thailand, as well as projects elsewhere. How do you think this process of working across geography and culture shapes the distinction you suggest, for you at least, between art and artist?
Another mentor. Nice to have you here, Michael. Thank you for the question. I've got to say that my participation in different geographies and different communities has been everything to how I place a distinction between art and artist, everything. As I shared my hesitation of my relationship to artists from the museum standpoint in Australia, that was a massive question mark that prompted me to want to explore further. And that prompt threw me into a recognition of the struggles different communities face on the ground in order to participate on an international level. And those local communities are often completely ignorant of what that international platform affords. Most of the time, because those local scenes are they're struggling. And what is more important is a lot of those local scenes have different imperatives, different targets for why they do what they do. And I still find myself battling with this local to international divide. I explore it in ways of language, in ways of different forms of engagement, trying to bridge the gap by bringing intelligence to one place, because there's too much of a tendency that the centers of the art world are the presumed dominant market centers of the world. And thus I've done my best to try and work outside those presumed centers. I was in Saigon and not Hanoi. I'm in Chiang Mai and not Bangkok. These have been also very deliberate decisions on my part to think about how are we participating in a decentering, how are we creating a different kind of, dare I say, zomia of regionalities where the articulation of local to international no longer is such an imperative. So to answer your question, I think that working across the various geographies and cultures has shaped me completely. And I will do my utmost to give that experience to others. And I think that's also another big kind of desire for me is to build projects and opportunities that extend imaginations. And that can sometimes mean just giving one person a hell of a lot of books from another part of the world. And maybe it's all fiction. Or maybe it's sending somebody a series of videos of interviews coming from 4 different university bodies and saying, watch this. Or maybe it's saying, I've got an educational opportunity for one artist to go and spend 3 months in the middle of the Amazonia. I mean, there's many different formats, and it doesn't always mean the need for a lot of money.
It's just about sharing knowledge, populating our heads with other ideas from other places, being comparative.
Thank you very much, Zoe. And that's a wonderful note on which to bring our meeting to a close. To populate our ideas, to populate our minds with ideas from different places, and to populate our ideas with different minds as well. And so with this beautiful thought, I would like to hand you over to Gayatri Uppal from the Sher-Gil Sundaram Art Foundation, who's with us to offer a vote of thanks for Zoe's lecture. Over to you, Gayatri. Thank you.
Thank you, Chaitanya. Good evening. I'm Gayatri Uppal, Associate Director at the Sher-Gil Sundaram Arts Foundation. On behalf of SSAF, I would like to thank Zoe Butt for delivering this compelling and thought-provoking lecture in memory of Tushar Joag. And many thanks to Chaitanya Sambrani for dialoguing and engaging with Zoe and for chairing this stimulating discussion. Thank you so much, Zoe and Chaitanya. I thank the audience for joining us from different parts of the world and time zones and for their attention. I would also like to take this opportunity to introduce our colleagues at SSAF and thank them for their contribution to this event. Saurav Sil is Archives Manager at SSAF and has designed the wonderful invitation and managed the technical aspects of this event. Saurav is here. And Malvika Madgulkar, Assistant Editor, Publications and Communications. And Malvika's handled the communications for this event. Malvika is also here, and Santosh Sani is our accounts executive. Please do visit our website ssaf.in and follow us on social media for updates about forthcoming programs. Thank you all for joining us this evening.